My name is Harper Quinn. I am 22 and the night I learned I was only family when convenient, I folded my suitcase and walked out the front door. Break time equals 2 /. If betrayal has ever silenced you, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more. The dining room sparkled under my parents' crystal chandelier. Lanterns, a string quartet, Aunt Marlene in a dress that could stop traffic. Yet there was one gap. The seat with my name card. I stood in the driveway, phone hot in my palm. I watched my brother Ethan step up to the podium and toast family, while our parents clapped like trained seals. I was inside the frame for a photo I was not allowed to be in. Quick family sketch. Kenneth Quinn, dad. Small-time developer turned local magnate. Loves deals more than people. Hides insecurity behind generosity. Evelyn Quinn, mom. PTA queen, image first. Skilled at smoothing scars with lipstick. Her flaw is optics over honesty. Ethan Quinn, brother. 28, real estate broker. Slick smile, the son of the family. Hides envy as entitlement. Aunt Marlene, retired teacher, kind. Keeps receipts for promises. My one loyal witness. They posted the gala photos with captions like, proud parents. Comments bloomed. I stared at a caption that said, family first. My thumb hovered. The invitation to the anniversary had gone to every other relative. I sent one RSVP, yes. No reply. Later a text from mom. We thought you were busy with school. She'd out the apology like a cheap napkin. I felt the old hollowness. The years of small favors I offered that became habit for them. Rent-covered tuition wires, dad's temporary loan that never returned. I walked into the garage where I used to solder circuits, pack a duffel and leave a note. I won't be your backup plan anymore. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. My plan wasn't to punish. It was to learn what I could be without them. I took the overnight bus north and for the first time in my life, I slept through a sunrise without waiting for someone to show up. The next morning my phone rang. It was Ethan. He had been laughing in the photos the night before. Now his voice was small and panicked. Harper, he said, please. I need you. I closed my eyes and asked myself, need what? Applause or answers? I answered, did we ever really know each other? I ended the call and the line went quiet, too quiet to be coincidence. The bus rattled on and so did something else. An old ledger in my mind that finally wanted to be counted. My phone pinged all day with messages I didn't open. I sat in a hostile common room with a cup of hotel coffee and wrote. I wrote down dates. When I'd wired tuition, when I'd patched a car loan, when I'd paid for dad's emergency vet bill for his prize spaniel. The ledger read like parental arithmetic. Give, expect, owe. I realized how tidy their ledger had been in their minds. I was the line item they assumed would always exist. Aunt Marlene's voice was the only one steady. She texted, keep receipts. People forget who was kind and who used kindness. She'd been the small, honest presence at every holiday, late with casseroles, early with tea. She believed in me when the Quinn dining room would not. I called her and she said, don't let them rewrite the record. Ethan's call returned. He was frantic. Harper, we're in trouble. Dad's investments. There's a leak. Money's moving. Lenders are calling. I need someone with your technical skill. There it was, the offer disguised as need. The tone of panic shimmered with privilege. Rescue me but don't expect thanks. I heard echoes from childhood, be useful, and decided this time I'd answer on my terms. I booked a cheap flight home under the pretense of dropping off a gift for mom. I arrived at the house with my bag but a different agenda. I wanted to look at the problem as a systems engineer looks at a failing program. Find the error, map the network, decide whether to patch or isolate. Inside, the house murmured with worry. Kenneth refused to meet my eyes. Evelyn fluttered as if calming a storm. Ethan avoided my stare. Their fluster smelled like excuses and cologne. They expected me to swoop in, quiet, competent, grateful. They had no idea how many lines I'd already circled in black. At the kitchen table, I set my laptop open, connected to a burner hotspot and pulled the cues like threads. I wasn't there to fix their pride. I was there to inventory what they had built on my labor and what they'd failed to disclose to creditors. When I logged into the Family Trust's portal, accessed via an old authorization Ethan forgot I still had because he'd always assumed he would, an alert popped. Unusual transfer flagged, $420,000 outgoing. Ethan looked at me with that old expectation. Please, he said. I considered. I could patch the hole. Or I could let the system expose what it wanted to hide. I typed a single line into the chat app and hit send. I can help. On one condition. The family waited for my price. They had no idea I'd already set the terms. They asked, name it. My condition was simple and surgical. Full transparency. I wanted access to accounts, statements, and board minutes. I wanted an independent auditor present. They balked. Evelyn's lips pursed, Kenneth's jaw tightened. This will hurt reputations, he said. Reputation in their world was a currency more valuable than honesty. A pause flickered over the table like a held breath. Then Ethan, voice made small by panic, said yes. He wanted the hole patched. He wanted payments to stop, calls to end. He did not want questions. I set my terms publicly. A notarized statement that any mitigation work I performed did not waive my right to demand reimbursement for prior loans, and a covenant that any attempts to silence me would be considered coercion. They signed because they were cornered and pragmatic when money was at stake. We worked long nights. I reversed transactions, pinned suspicious accounts, and traced shell allocations. The ledger they thought only in whispers turned out to be a web. Offshore entities, corporate loans disguised as consulting fees, and one explicit line where Kenneth had signed a personal guarantee and then shifted the burden into a trust he claimed was for the family. The trust housed assets that factored into lenders' confidence. Assets that vanished just before calls screaming for liquidity started. Ethan watched as I mapped the network. He saw his father in a new grid, fallible, exposed. Tears came sometimes, not from sorrow but from seeing the scaffold of his entitlement wobble. Late one night, after a day of tracing, Ethan's voice broke. I didn't know. He sounded 11 years old. We were told to clap and not ask questions. I could have let the ledger be the final reveal. Instead, I made a choice that bent the arc. I would make their hypocrisy public unless they met another term, one that would require them to face outsiders. I asked that Kenneth contact the bank and the trustee and schedule a full audit in writing. I wanted signatures. I wanted witnesses. They agreed. Not because they wanted to amend behavior but because they were better at legal dance than moral reform. Their signatures were brittle but they were there. I filed a copy of the auditor's appointment with my lawyer and left it on the kitchen table. The next morning, the first creditor called demanding immediate answers. Ethan begged me not to go to the press. Please, Harper. Don't humiliate Dad. I looked at him and thought of the empty seat at the anniversary, the masked claps, the way his success was always celebratory and mine invisible. I straightened my spine and said, humiliation is what you taught me. I prefer documentation. He whispered, do what you have to. And for the first time in a long time I felt in control, enough to decide how public the repair would be. Then a new message arrived on my burner. A photograph of a wire transfer confirmation, $200,000, sent from Ethan's account that night. The photo arrived with the quiet of a dropped pin. The transfer had been made to an unknown vendor in another state, labeled Emergency Partnership Expense. The timestamp, 2:12 a.m. I stared at the numbers and felt a cold clarity. Someone was bleeding the house dry while promising I would fix the leak. I confronted Ethan. He swore he'd done it to stop a foreclosure on a small family property, the kind of story that sounds plausible especially when squealing lenders are involved. But the vendor's address traced to a shell company and a post office box. My audits indicated the money never touched a contractor's floorboard. At dinner that night, the conversation curdled. Evelyn came at me with fragile fury. You're destroying the family, she said, voice trembling. You've gone to the bank and humiliated us. I countered with receipts. She accused me of betrayal. I reminded her of the seat with my name card. It was a private spectacle with public consequences. Ethan sat there, small and furious, feeling both exposed and entitled. He accused me of making enemies. Who do you want to hurt? He hissed. Why can't you just fix it privately? I reached past him and set my phone on the table. On the screen, a draft email to a financial journalist with redacted documents attached. Because private fixes let private lies stay private, I said. If truth must sting, let it sting equally. That night, I slept poorly, awoken by the echo of Kenneth's half-phrases. We gave you everything, as if giving silence and entitlement were gifts. But in the morning a new box arrived. A legal notice. Someone had filed for an emergency injunction seeking to freeze corporate accounts, filed by a creditor who claimed unauthorized transfers. The motion named Kenneth and his holdings with attachments that paralleled my findings. It dawned on me that someone else, someone with access, was acting in parallel. Either an ally had turned up on my side, or my family's missteps had been faster than their denials. My inbox pinged with a new number. The voice on the line was a bank officer. "Ms. Quinn, we've placed a temporary restriction pending formal discovery. We'll need authorizations." Ethan's voice was a thin wire. "You did this." The accusation came soft as a blade. I wasn't sure I'd started this domino effect. Maybe the system had an appetite and had begun to eat. Or maybe someone in their circle had decided to bring the ledger to light independently. Either way, the traps placed to silence me were snapping at other feet. I considered deleting the draft to the journalist. Then I remembered Aunt Marlene's words. "Let witnesses speak." I hit send. The next morning the headline said, "Regional developer faces emergency freezes." The inquiry was thorough and cold. Subpoenas arrived like rain. Trustees were appointed. Kenneth's name, once a headline fixture of philanthropic dinners, became a line in legal documents. Board members recused themselves. The company's market value wavered. Lawyers circled like gulls. For the first time they tasted the consequence of their casual dismissals. Evelyn experienced the sound of bank hold music and it humbled her. Ethan watched the family name wither in investor emails. They called me to plead, to bargain, to ask me to slow the drumbeat. I did not. People asked whether I'd intended this outcome. The honest answer was, I intended accountability. I wanted the house and the people in it to be honest about what they'd relied on me for. I wanted documented change. The law did the rest. Aunt Marlene visited with a casserole and a look like sunrise. "You did what was right," she said simply. She had been there when I'd mended our roof with my own hands and when she tipped me $1 for lunch. She saw the difference between being used and being valued. Ethan's life frayed. His clients called about shaken confidence. He had always relied on the family name as an assumption of competence. When the name was questioned, that assumption evaporated. He came to me one morning. No pretense, no entitlement, only raw fear. "Harper," he said, "I'm scared." It was the first time I'd heard fear not wrapped in performance. I could have extended forgiveness then, quietly behind the scenes. Instead, I did something more surgical. I offered conditional support, cooperation with auditors, mediation with restitution schedules, counseling to rebuild ethical practices. He accepted. Meanwhile, the trustees found discrepancies large enough to warrant civil suits against a few of Kenneth's close advisors. Kenneth's board position was put on hold. The philanthropic gala invitations stopped arriving. Publicly, I remained composed. Privately, I felt a hollow ache. This was not the joy of seeing them fall, but the sorrow of finally seeing them stripped of their unearned invulnerability. At night, I dreamt of the empty chair at the anniversary table, and in the morning I woke to a new message. From Ethan, "Dad is asking for your help to manage press." Kenneth called a family meeting that time with a different cadence, without the sheen of celebration. He looked older not because age had crept in but because the scaffolding of performance had been removed. The trustee sat at his place, a neutral presence who didn't care for nostalgia or sentiment, only documents. At the table I laid out the family governance charter I'd insisted on. Limits on unilateral transfers, quarterly independent audits, and a restitution plan prioritizing creditors and then family members with documented loans. I proposed a public fund, the Quinn Community Resilience Trust, financed by a percentage of remaining liquid assets to support the town where Kenneth had made his name. Evelyn faltered on the charity idea. She had always preferred grand gestures to quiet policy, but Aunt Marlene nodded and said, "We do owe the neighborhood more than just a plaque." The trustee approved the charter pending legal refinement. Ethan signed, his hand small but steady. Kenneth signed with a slow, reluctant pen. Each signature felt like a small unmaking of their old habits. Habits that had turned kindness into ledgers they never balanced. Outside the court of public opinion, small mercies appeared. Employees who had been unfairly let go were offered severance. Vendors were paid. Some families in our town who had been silently exploited received help from the newly formed trust. The press began to call these moves reparative. I did not claim credit publicly, I let the documents speak. Behind the scenes, I made sure there was accountability, performance bonds for future philanthropic projects, third-party oversight, and a steering committee with community representatives. Ethan and I sat late one night on the back porch with 2 mugs of cold tea. He looked at me, years and entitlement and fear folded into one vulnerable person. "Will anything be the same?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But it can be better if people stop expecting silence to be payment." He nodded. We were not reconciled in a neat bow, but there was a beginning. Restitution, accountability, and a framework that prevented future erasure. Break time equals 2/. That winter, Quinn Industries Holdings stabilized under trustee supervision. Kenneth retreated from the spotlight. He sent a letter to community partners apologizing for oversight. It was short and clipped, but it existed. And late one night, while reviewing the trust documents, I found a small handwritten note tucked into an old ledger. My father's handwriting: "Never stop building." I kept the note. It sat between pages until the day the trustees closed the final civil matter with a settlement that included restitution and governance changes. Kenneth's name remained, but his power was no longer absolute. The family's public life had been remade into something less performative and more accountable. If betrayal has ever silenced you, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more. On the morning the settlement was announced, my brother called in the old, small voice that no banquet ever gave him. "Harper," he said quietly, "thank you." He meant it in a way that kept no performative flourish. I accepted nothing theatrical. I accepted a private meeting where he signed a restitution schedule and enrolled in a professional ethics program. He agreed to public community service and to speak at 2 town events about accountability. He looked ashamed but earnest. I accepted that his contrition would have to be proven over time. That evening I drove to the place where I'd once fixed a leaky roof with my own hands and sat there, letting the cold air be the only applause. I thought about silence and how long I had kept it as medicine and as armor. I thought about the ledger, my years of small payments, the nights I had patched things that never earned me a thank you. I opened my phone and typed one last message to the family group chat. Brief, precise, and final. I recorded every loan. I filed every receipt. The house stands, the ledger is closed. Then I added the final line they would not expect. And I will not answer any other calls. I hit send, then blocked the thread. It was not cruelty. It was boundary. Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it? Tell me below, and subscribe for more true tales. I locked my car, walked into the night, and felt the quiet not as emptiness but as territory. I had reclaimed my name, my work, and my peace. The final pleasure wasn't in their ruin. It was in the fact that I no longer needed them to define me. Silence turned into my own power.